So you just got handed somebody's old gaming rig, and lo and behold, it's packing an i7 2600K and a GTX 950. Both are great options for a long time, but can't still hold up in 2022. Let's start off with the system itself. There is an i7 2600K, an EVGA GTX 950 SC Plus, and 16 gigs of DDR3 RAM at 1333 MHz. The 2600K being launched in January 2011, this CPU is part of Intel's Sandy Bridge architecture, launching at a price of $317, though I found mine for around $50 USD. The 2600 is clocked at 3.4 GHz and with a boost clock of 3.8 GHz. Though, if you have the right motherboard, and since this is a K variant, you could overclock this one. Now, with 4 cores and 8 threads, I think its raw performance will help it keep up even modern titles. The GTX 950 had a paper launch in August 2015 with an MSRP around $160. This card is a part of NVIDIA's Maxwell architecture, which includes the 900 series and the 750 Ti, which for the most part has aged pretty well and currently pretty affordable considering the 2022 chip shortage, the scalper pandemic, but all that's coming down right now. So hopefully you guys can get this for much cheaper now. This specific card is the EVGA 950 SC Plus. I bought this one brand new all the way back in 2015 for $120. We'll start off with Cinebench. With the i7 2600K being as old as it is, I'm impressed how well it holds up compared to its modern contemporaries. Scoring an average on multi is 3046 and for single 630. Now to quickly running 3D Mark, these scores are 5681 for Fire Strike and 2065 for Time Spy. Next up, free game benchmarks, as sometimes you just spent all your money on a fresh PC and you need to take that bad boy for a spin. For free. Starting off big here. For Halo Infinite, I took the average of 3 big team battle rounds to pull the most out of Halo. With 1080p low with anti-aliasing high, I got an average of 40 FPS, a 1% low of 20 FPS, and a 0.1% low of 13 FPS. The biggest downside of using the GTX 950 for Halo is that 2 gigs of VRAM being the most limiting factor. With that being said, the average comes out to 40 FPS, but for a majority of the time it stuck around the 30s, on occasion dipping below when there is too much action going on. I didn't benchmark it like this, but you set the frame rate to max frame rate to 60. Oddly enough, the average FPS is just a tad bit higher. Also setting the resolution to scale to 71% also gives you a few more frames as well. Surprisingly, the i7 2600K was only using roughly around 80 to 95% CPU usage, while the 950 was nearly maxing out the entire time. Next up is high-res hero shooter Paladins. Just like Halo, I took the average of 3 rounds, with 1080p max settings. Average 103 FPS, with a 1% 59 FPS, and a 0.1% low 11 FPS. Not so surprising, Paladins ran very well with a setup like this, with it first being playable back in 2016, and just like its main competitor Overwatch, it's well optimized and can run on most machines. Don't be shocked about the 1% low, it literally happens 0.01% of the time. Besides that, it runs mostly around the 90 through 100 FPS mark. Now we have Apex. I'm glad to say it was a very smooth experience. At 1080p low, medium model details, and anti-soptic by 2, our average is 71 FPS, 1% low at 51 FPS, 0.01% low 45 FPS. The only real stutter I can recall was actually the main menu when you first starting up the game. Anyway, I got the average from 3 rounds of arenas, which is usually less intensive than Battle Royale, but you shouldn't lose too much performance if you do play Battle Royale. You'll still be well above 60 FPS. So yeah, for Apex, I can recommend the GTX 950 paired with something at least on this level of the i7. So we have Genshin Impact. I have at 1080p medium settings. We get around average 59 FPS, 1% low of 3 FPS, and a 0.01 low of 0.04 FPS. Now don't be shocked. I played for 30 minutes running around Mondstadt around the world and a quickie dungeon. I was originally going to do high settings, but ended up running around 45 or so FPS. The most you lose from going down from high to medium is some shadow quality. But with that bump down to the average, went from 45 to a constant 60 FPS. Don't be too alarmed by the 1 and 0.01% again. Those are usually loading screen stutters as it loads up everything. Other than that, everything else is smooth. Next, our free benchmark is everybody's favorite game, Fortnite. We have 1080p Pro settings, average at 90 FPS, low at 1% low, 26 FPS, and 0.01 low, 8 FPS. Now don't be surprised again, those stutters happen when you're jumping out of the battle bus, but overall it is a smooth experience. And if you want to play Fortnite over 60 FPS with Pro settings with this setup, it will allow you to do so. Now, I bumped it up to 1080p medium settings just to see what it was, and it was an average of 58 FPS, 1% low 25 FPS, and a 0.0111 FPS. And if you're wondering if you could play at a higher quality, well, high settings was only around 36 FPS, but medium you got around the 58 FPS, which is really close to that 60 FPS everyone wants. So we have Elden Ring at home. So we have Grasshopper Studios' Let It Die, a free-to-play roguelike Souls-like with a Tokyo punk aesthetic, and may I add, a banger soundtrack. .1080p maximum settings. I get the average of 103 FPS, and don't be alarmed by the 1% and 0.01% again. So, alright, first off, don't be alarmed. Those are only for those loading screens and, on your way, to the next area. But with that said, it was an enjoyable experience with FPS over 100 majority of the time. If you're looking for something different, I would recommend Let It Die with this setup. Just prepare to die a lot for the first 30 minutes to an hour. With that concludes my free games benchmark. I was going to include Valorant or CSGO, but I simply ran out of time. But I'm not too worried about if they play well or not, considering we got like 40 FPS for Halo Infinite. Would I recommend getting these parts new? Not the CPU, considering that the new i3s perform just as well or better than this 11-year-old part. I don't recommend it unless you're absolutely able to get it for pennies. Now, for the GTX 950, I think it still holds up for the most part now. Obviously, it's an old dog, so 1080p or even 900p low in modern games will be its sweet spot. As is, it's a great stopgap card, but I don't recommend spending more than $80 for it. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. See you guys next time.